Okay, guys, part 3 of the Edged Weapons series here, back with Nate and Jared. So we're going to mix it up a little. So we talked about tomahawks, and so a little bit of backstory on this. So Nate and I, every year, we come up with a new, like, 1911 Syndicate blade, right? And kind of over the course of time, in theory, you will have, like, hey, here's your catalog of knives that you can choose from.
Season 1, Season 2, Season 3.
Yeah, and really we're on 3 now, which is what this is. So this year we were like, let's do a Kukri. Actually, credit to Chris Blau, who you both know. You've met Chris, co-host with me. We met him down in Vegas when we saw a SHOT Show. But there's a Chris Blau credit to this. This will make him very happy. He's like cheering at home right now that he's getting credit for this. But so we did kind of a mini Kukri, which is what this is. And really at the end of the day, like, I mean, we did it based on it being more of an all-purpose outdoors tool, you know, bushcraft, all that. Even though the reality is, to my understanding, they have their roots inside of combatives, you know, more of a defense tool.
Exactly. Yeah. This, I mean, for a lot of people that kind of know the history, when you talk about the Kukri, the Gurkhas come to mind, right? Which is, it's their traditional blade from the Gurkhas of Nepal. And the Gurkhas are, I mean, within certain circles, are kind of there's a mystique about them, but they're these, you know, legendary warriors from Nepal that are actually part of the kind of mercenaries almost. That, you know, a lot of Nepalese that are able to make it into the Gurkhas, which is, from what I understand, kids growing up in Nepal, everyone wants to be a Gurkha. It's like a national kind of a national symbol of pride for them.
Would it almost be akin to like samurai culture?
Pretty much. It's that's what it's like for them. You know, they've got and you know, they either want to get into the Royal Gurkha Rifles, which is part of the British Army, and then they get to, you know, go, and even though Nepal is not a Commonwealth country, but they provide part of the armed forces of the United Kingdom. And then there's the Singapore Gurkhas, and they're contracted to go to Singapore and provide basically a special forces type contingent to their security forces in Singapore also, which I've actually worked a bit with the Gurkhas in Singapore, providing some training for them.
Super cool. And do they do firearm stuff too?
They do, absolutely. They're
I don't know if this was like primary service.
No, it's so they, you know, they just like any soldier, they learn the rifle, you know, and if it requires handgun and whatnot, but they all carry a Kukri, and they're trained to use it as a close quarter tool. And there's been, you know, documented instances where they've used it in recent wars. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty wild. So okay, so how do you know, when you look at this, you don't really think fighting knife. So how is that applied?
Yeah, so you know, if you kind of look at a lot, you know, the thing that about the Kukri that a lot of people recognize is the curve in the blade, right, and then that deep belly. Those are two kind of probably the most, you know, recognizable things, and they come in different lengths. Just like this one, it would be more of a shorter version, and they come in quite long versions of them. And so that's, you know, it's this type of tool. If you kind of look through history, not just the Gurkhas, but there's been other civilizations that have preferred that type of tool. You look at some of the old Greek swords; they have that same angle to them, and it's just that angle creates a little bit more torque when you're talking about chopping and cutting. And some edge weapons are designed more for puncturing. Some are designed to be good puncturing and cutting tools. The Gurkha is primarily a chopping and cutting tool. A lot like, you know, if you look at the Philippines, they have the barong. The barong is what some of the southern tribes use as their version of the Kukri. It's got that same deep belly, just not the curve that the Kukri has. Yep. And again, that makes it, for combative purposes, if you're looking at chopping motions, you're literally cutting limbs off, literally cutting heads off in a single strike. So that's the capability of a good blade when you're talking about the cutting.
Yeah, and that one I'm assuming would just be too short, too lightweight. I mean, it's more of a mini.
Yeah, that's something in between. You know, there's a give and take, especially for modern day application of this type of a tool. Is
right.
You know, the size does give reach. It might slow it down based on the weight that you're adding to it, but it also makes it less practical for everyday carry type things that are on a backpack when you're hiking, or keep it in the car, or whatever. The nice thing about these tools too, just like a tomahawk or a hatchet, is it's not a single purpose tool. It's not just for defense. It's a tool that you can use on the campsite for cutting, chopping.
That's what mine's getting used for. That's where mine's getting marred up. Is just chopping wood.
For me, that's the sign of a good EDC weapon is, can I use it for other things? You know, if it's just a single purpose tool, sometimes it might get left at home or left where you
It's hard to justify having
it on you at all
the
times.
time.
Exactly.
If it's only got one single
exactly.
purpose,
So when it's a multi-purpose tool, then it's more likely to be with you when you need it in a defensive situation.
Yeah, and even part of the let me borrow that plate for a sec. You know, but part of the thought when we were doing this was, you know, I've got enough material here too that if I needed to do fine, you know, like you know, taking a deer apart or something like that. Like I've got a buddy who he's gonna go, you know, deer hunt or elk hunting later this year, and I'm like, I really want to see how this thing does in, you know, to actually like break down an animal, you know. But you know, same with that little wedge there, just, you know, being able to, you know, get some shavings or whatever it may be. Actually, you on the bladesmithing side might have any.
Well, you know, when we were first talking about it, it was, you know, kukri knife. It's like, I'm thinking, you know, this big, and you say, well, it's got to be compact. And so, kind of like with the tomahawk, we were thinking something more shorter, stockier, like a hatchet. So it could be lots of control, but lots of power, and lots of curve. I love curves as a bladesmith. Curves cut.
Who doesn't love curves?
Yeah,
who doesn't
love curves? Yeah, this should be a given. Yeah,
man,
there's another
sign
T-shirt,
off
by the way. Yeah, I
love
love curves.
Nate's Summers.
It's something the size that you can cut things from different angles, especially outside. Trees, limbs are everywhere in all kinds of directions. If you're cutting something from off the tree over here, you can push, you can choke up, and have an area of contact at any one of these angles in relation to the edge, in relation to my wrist. So versatility.
Yeah.
As a box cutter is pretty specific to boxes.
Yeah. For anyone who's wondering, what was the steel and handle material in that?
80 CRV2. The handle was this was the bling part of it.
Yeah. You gotta have a little fun with it.
He said, you had said, like, well, let's just combine some stuff and you know, be creative for fun. And so this was it?
Black mesquite was the wood.
Black mesquite with the wood. And it was a zebra or camel?
Zebra, yeah.
This is zebra bone. Zebra bone mosaic pins. The handle is flared, so it has really, really good for chopping. Take my word for it, if there's not enough handle there, then blades can leave your hand pretty quick, especially, it's going somewhere. So it's having just enough is just enough of something like this. So I wanted to be, you could take down a tree with this, but it was comfortable enough to have on you and not be exhausting, not to add. What was it? What was the bug out seminar? We talked about that ounces or pounds when you're bugging out. Yeah, with Kirkham.
Yeah.
That's something I really took to heart. I really like to just prioritizing, like, what is the most you possibly need, what's the most you get away with, don't do more than that.
Yeah.
And I think for something like this is enough. This is stout enough that you could baton it through a log, but it's small enough that if you are doing fine work, you have control.
Yeah, controllable. Well, cool. Why don't we'll pause and then maybe jump in a little bit on the combative side.
Okay. All right, guys, so kind of looking at some of the defensive capability of the kukri type blade, right? There's a lot of universality. I kind of talked about this when we were talking about tomahawks. Universality in contact weaponry, right? The same attributes that are going to make you good with one are going to bleed over to another. The ability to have good speed and power, the body mechanics involved with that, the reach, the timing and the precision, they all kind of ties together. And so those are what we call attributes, and you can do training drills that can help to enhance those. And then you've got actual movements with the weapon, the manipulation of the weapon itself. Okay, and like I said, a lot of universality and how you could approach that. But what I'll kind of talk a little bit about are some of the with blades in particular. We're talking about, we often call in the Filipino martial arts the slash and thrust principle and how those are related, right? Because I can slash and I can thrust on different angles, and they both have their place. This is primarily a slashing tool. It's a cutting tool, but it has the ability to be able to put the thrust, the puncture also. Yeah. And so you want that versatility, because if all you can do are angular strikes, they can become a little bit more predictable against someone that knows what they're doing.
Sure.
But thrusting angles combined with slashing angles add another dynamic to the mix that make it a little harder to predict, and sometimes those thrusting lines can be harder to defend.
Would there be something to be said from a thrusting perspective? Hey, not everyone necessarily, I mean, I guess it's kind of instinctual, but it's like, from a rough perspective, everyone kind of knows how to throw a punch out there.
Yeah, no,
which would probably be part of the argument of push daggers and things like that. It's
Yeah,
like,
no.
dude, just start punching.
Yeah, it's a very natural movement for a lot of people. And again, it's a movement that can be enhanced through training, but it's a fairly natural movement. And like I tell people all the time, without any training, people are killing other human beings with blades all the time, right?
Yep.
And so the tool in and of itself is a deadly tool. It's just that training can enhance that ability, right?
Sure.
And now I'm dealing with maybe someone else that's armed. He's got the ability to kill also. So what makes me better than him?
Yeah.
And so training becomes an important dynamic in that mix.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So I'll kind of go through and I'll show some angles that I think are easy to learn, easy to practice. Again, with the and I'll kind of have you
Step up.
Yep,
Yep.
so I don't accidentally cut your limb off.
Please don't.
But basically, my posture is going to be fairly much the same. I've got, as I discussed with the tomahawk, the more orthodox position is going to be weapon side forward, right? If you think about like fencers, they always have the weapon side forward because in the absence of a shield, this hand is just a target, right? Now, if I add a shield, and that may be an improvised shield, I may have a backpack or the leather jacket that you wrap around your arm. I don't know if anyone wears leather jackets these days, but anyway, leather jacket type thing. But if I had some kind of a shield, then maybe I'm in this posture. Otherwise, this hand is not, I don't want to defend against a weapon with my arm, right? And so weapon side forward is very, very common. If I, for some reason, am using deadly force to protect against someone or individuals, a number of people that were not armed, then a lot of times my posture may be weapon side back because I want to prevent them from being able to grab onto my arm or the weapon, and so I'm defending that. And then we look at angles. A lot of the angles that you'll typically see in a lot of blade fighting systems begin with some kind of a figure like a figure 8 or an X type movement. Okay, and so you've got slashing, and sometimes with the kukri, depending on how long it is, I can hit and then draw back with that. So I'm chopping and then drawing back. I'm chopping and then drawing back. Depending on how big the blade is, I may be doing double force. This blade I'm very comfortable using with one hand, which is preferred because I can get body dynamics that allow to get a little bit more power with that. But if it was a heavier weapon, I may be bracing the wrist and doing double force with that, double force. And so I'm hitting, and then I could be cutting back with that also. So those are some things that you can be looking at downward on that X. I can go upward on the X too. Cutting up, which requires bringing the elbow in, turning the blade, and cutting up, and then cutting up here. So that's very common because they're very diverse movements. I can defend with these. I can defend with my upward movement. I can attack. And then you always got to have some kind of a thrusting movement in that, in your training. With the kukri, a lot of times, because of that angle, it's a slightly different angle than if I had a straight blade, right? So with this, I can be essentially being familiar with the angle, and I can do thrusting motions. I can thrust up this way. With this one, I can put a nice brace with my thumb on the spine there as I thrust forward, kind of an index, and I can thrust forward here. I can turn it so that it's flat, and I can thrust in that way also, right? So thrusting here. Sometimes if the curve is, the weapon is longer and there's a pronounced curve, if I thrust this way, I got to be careful that I'm not going to make contact and lose some of that force by that tipping inward. So I got to make sure I get the right angle here. And sometimes that can be fixed by coming in that higher, like you said, it's almost like I'm throwing a punch here. Yeah. I'm just thrusting forward, and that's another angle. So this is the versatility of straight lines and angular movements. Yeah.
Why don't you mention the angle of how that blade?
Well, there's I've seen. Now I have seen some kukri designs before that there's lots of curvature to it, but I could tell that.
Move further in.
Oh, yeah. I could tell that with the design that the tip wasn't going to line up with the hand naturally.
Yeah.
So I paid especially careful attention to that. If I were to punch with this, the back is lined up with my
and I
bones
just,
all
as we
the
were
way
filming,
down.
I just noticed that because today's the first time I've seen this blade, and I was noticing how that lines up really well. Because typically, as you mentioned, most kukri, traditional kukri designs, it's not designed with that thrust in mind, and so you get an awkward angle there, which not impossible. Sometimes you're not going to get a lot of penetration with that thrust. It can still be effective. You get that steel thrusting in at you, but it's maybe more of a distraction than an actual fight finisher.
Exactly.
That I can see how you've designed that to be supported by that wrist.
I wanted this. That was one thing I noticed that I knew. If I added that, it would make what I'm doing a little bit distinguished compared to the people who aren't doing it.
Right.
So I'm proud of it.
That's
I think it's a
great.
good design. It works very, very well. It feels very, very natural. And
It's almost like it's like pointing forward with the gun. It's not
You
quite the
should be
same
able
angle,
to
but the
point,
idea with the wrist right there, you've got great support.
was one of my favorite things, like in picking up weapons I'm building, or weapons I'm planning to build. As I pick it up, when I articulate it, when I change it, when I twist it, point with it, is it as natural as it is with my fingers, or do I have to adjust somehow?
Yeah.
And so that's always, it's ever present in every single thing I build. Is just how does it feel?
Yeah.
This is something where it's going directly from my hand to. There's no mechanism here other than how it's shaped.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
like
very important.
and like I said, a lot of people that are using blades defensively, as we've got the advantage these days of seeing a lot of videos of these types of things. A lot of people, they don't have any training, but they can still be effective with them, right? And the more natural those movements can become based on the design, then the more you can tap into the more natural ability to use that weapon.
How well does it lend to it? It's on some things I've seen people hurt themselves with the weapons.
Yeah.
Straining their wrists or breaking or it turns or twists in the
Or even
hand.
hand sliding down onto the blade.
Man,
So,
yes, I've seen it. I've seen it all, and it's obvious when something is difficult for the person to dial in or figure out. Control.
yeah.
Natural movement combined with control is pretty unstoppable.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
You can't get it wrong.
Yeah.
Cool. So the only bummer of this blade is that really you can't buy them. It's, I know I'm always a little bit of a dick when we do videos on Syndicate knives because it's like, well, you really can't buy them. You kind of have
If you donate
to.
$1,000, you might get one. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No, available for bribery is kind of how we are around here. But they're really cool. We try to keep some of this stuff really exclusive inside of like Syndicate clients just to give you guys something cool, a little bit. Little extra spikes at the end of the deal. But anyway, thanks to Nate, Jared, you want to go Tricom training, which, I mean, you travel all over. I guess home base is Salt Lake, but
Home base is yep, exactly. I teach mostly outside of Utah, different parts of the world, different parts of the country. But tricomtraining.com is a good site to see some of my combative material.
Cool. We'll try to throw a link down in the description too. So, all right, one more video now on more of a dedicated EDC combative tool.